Have you ever actually stopped to think about the incredible amount of trust we place in laboratories every single day? I mean, whether it's a blood test at the doctor's office, the environmental safety report for your local drinking water, or even the quality control check on the car you drive, we rely on lab results to be completely, unquestionably accurate. But here is the million-dollar question. How do we know that the laboratories testing our products, our environment, and our health are actually getting it right? Basically, who exactly tests the testers?
Well, welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this topic today. We're going to demystify the ultimate rulebook that ensures laboratories worldwide are operating at peak competence. I'm talking about the international standard formerly known as ISO/IEC 17043. If you want to understand the invisible framework of accuracy that protects, well, almost every aspect of our modern lives, you are in exactly the right place. All right, let's just dive right in. To make this dense standard as clear as possible, we've broken it down into a 6-part agenda. Section 1, what is proficiency testing? Section 2, impartiality and structural requirements. Section 3, resources needed for success. Section 4, executing the PT process. Section 5, statistical analysis and evaluation. And finally, Section 6, maintaining the management system. So the official 2023 edition of ISO/IEC 17043 isn't just some piece of bureaucratic red tape. It's literally the foundational guide for global testing accuracy. Conformity assessment bodies, accreditation groups, and regulators all over the world use this exact document to confirm that a proficiency testing provider is highly competent and, most importantly, capable of generating valid performance evaluations. Okay, Section 1. What is proficiency testing? Before we hit the heavy regulations, we really need to demystify the core concepts here. The standard defines proficiency testing, or PT, as the evaluation of participant performance against pre-established criteria by means of interlaboratory comparisons. Honestly, think of it like a highly controlled blind taste test for laboratories, except instead of soda, they're testing soil samples or blood plasma. A provider sends out the exact same, or at least highly similar items to multiple different labs. The labs test those items using their normal everyday procedures and send the results back. By comparing all those results, we can definitively prove if a lab's measurement methods are actually sound, or if they have an underlying problem that needs fixing. Moving on to Section 2, impartiality and structural requirements. Now that we know what PT is, who actually gets to run these complex schemes? And what fundamental rules do they have to follow to maintain absolute trust? Clauses 4.1 and 4.2 of the standard lay down 2 non-negotiable pillars: impartiality and confidentiality. For impartiality, the PT provider has to actively monitor and safeguard against any commercial or financial pressures that could compromise their neutrality. Basically, they can't play favorites. On the flip side, confidentiality is all about protecting the participants. The provider must use legally enforceable agreements to protect lab identities and any proprietary data. So, unless a lab specifically waives its rights, its identity in a PT scheme is known only to the people operating the scheme itself. Which brings us to Section 3, resources needed for success. Right, so with the ethical and structural foundation set, we need to look at the tangible assets required to actually pull this off under Clause 6 of the standard. The crucial point here is that you can't just run a PT scheme out of your garage. Providers need access to personnel who are strictly documented as competent to handle their specific tasks. They need highly controlled facilities to prevent cross-contamination or any adverse environmental influences on the test items. But here's the major takeaway when it comes to external service providers. While a PT provider can totally buy materials from outside, Clause 6.4 strictly forbids them from outsourcing the core intellect of the operation. They absolutely cannot outsource the design of the scheme, the evaluation of the performance, or the final authorization of the reports. No way. All right, Section 4, executing the PT process. So, now that we've got our personnel in place and our facilities secured, how do we actually design and run the scheme? Clause 7 breaks the PT process down into a very rigorous life cycle. Step 1 is design and planning, which involves some heavy statistical design and determining the assigned values. Step 2 is production and distribution, where the actual test items are created, checked for homogeneity and stability, and then shipped out. And finally, Step 3 is evaluation and reporting, where the return data is meticulously analyzed to evaluate lab performance. I actually really love this specific quote directly from the standard. The whole goal is to test a lab's normal capabilities, right? So the PT items should mimic their everyday work as closely as humanly possible. But because these materials can be incredibly sensitive, the standard demands crystal clear instructions. Participants need to know exactly how to handle, store, prepare, and manipulate these items to assure validity. The provider has to take all those complex protocols and translate them into plain English, so bulletproof that the material isn't compromised before the test even begins. Next up, Section 5, Statistical Analysis and Evaluation. Okay, so the labs have sent their results back. Now we enter the most critical phase, tackling the heavy data evaluation and statistical methods detailed over in Annex B of the standard. Because before you can grade a lab, you have to be absolutely sure the test was fair. That means statistically proving the test items were homogeneous and stable. Then you determine the assigned value, which is basically the correct answer. Often, this requires what the standard calls metrological traceability. In plain English, that just means tracing a measurement back to an unquestionable, internationally recognized source or reference standard. Once you have that solid anchor, you can finally calculate the performance statistics. Now, Annex B provides the actual statistical methods to do this, including things like the zeta score and the EN score. What's really fascinating about these formulas is how the EN score specifically factors in expanded uncertainties. It doesn't just look at a lab's simple result. It mathematically accounts for the estimated uncertainty in the participant's measurement compared to the assigned value. It's a much more holistic way to measure performance. So, what do these formulas actually tell us at the end of the day? Well, according to the conventional performance criteria in the standard, the desired outcome is for the EN value to be as close to 0 as possible. If a lab's result generates an absolute value of EN that is greater than or equal to 1.0, that is simply not acceptable. This creates what's known as an action signal. It is a massive red flag telling the laboratory, hey, you have a measurable problem and you need to investigate your processes right now. Finally, Section 6, Maintaining the Management System. Let's just zoom out for a second for our final section. We've looked at the micro level of statistics and item handling, but what is the overarching system that keeps this entire PT operation running smoothly year after year? Well, that's covered in Clause 8, which outlines the Quality Management System, or QMS. A PT provider can't just be good at math, they have to be organizational masters. They're required to have strict document and record control, proactive processes to identify and address risks and opportunities, scheduled internal audits, and comprehensive management reviews. This culture of continuous improvement and meticulous record-keeping, that is the glue holding the provider's technical competence together. As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought. We rarely actually see the proficiency testing providers, yet they are quite literally the ultimate guardians of accuracy in our society. Whether you are running a laboratory, managing a massive supply chain, or just, relying on safe consumer products, these invisible frameworks of accuracy impact your daily life. So how can you leverage the rigorous principles of ISO/IEC 17043 to demand and guarantee absolute confidence in the data you rely on every single day? It's a fascinating question for sure, and one I really hope you're eager to explore further.